Welcome to part one of a three-part series on how to read a contract. Now, first off, you might be saying, I already know how to read. True, but reading a contract is a little bit different. And secondly, when given the opportunity, did you in fact read the entire contract? It's essential that we read the entire contract, and we're going to do it in a three-part manner. The first part is going to be about the variable portions of a contract. The second two will be about the general terms and conditions, or what we sometimes refer to as boilerplate. So let's first get into those variable parts. Now, initially we might think this is the exciting part of a contract, and it is a very important part, but not necessarily the most important. So parts 2 and parts 3 will be equally important. But let's first look at these and find a new way of perhaps reading a contract. I'm going to suggest that we use 6 interrogatory pronouns and prepositions: who, what, where, when, why, and how. In fact, it was Rudyard Kipling who, toward the end of his career, was asked, how did he gain such success? And he wrote, I had 6 honest serving men who taught me all I knew. Their names were where, what, when, why, how, and who. Well, we're going to use it in a slightly different order. We're going to go who, what, where, when, why, and how. And let's begin with who. When you look at your contract, the first thing you want to know is who, in fact, are the parties. Who is signing the contract? Who are we working for? Is there a construction management company that's between the owner and the general contractor? What opportunities do we have to know who we are in fact working for and who in fact is calling the shots? In addition to that, I want to draw your attention to the signature block at the end of the contract. Now, it appears at the end of this contract. Often it doesn't. Often it appears before the general conditions. That doesn't mean you shouldn't also read the general conditions, because the general conditions are going to be made a part of the contract in some phrase or clause within the signed contract. Now, that said, if we go back to the who is signing this contract, we see that it's a contractor. We also see that you are the subcontractor signing the contract. When we look at who the parties are, initially it's only these two people who have authority to make changes to the contract. And that is very important, because you may get on a job and someone may tell you, well, do this or do that, and I'll get you paid for it. And they may not have the authority to do that. Until you have changes made to the contract, these are the only two parties authorized to make changes, until you have authorization somewhere else in writing. So make sure you know that. And also you'll see that in very small writing it says, sign, date, and return both copies to R.S. Cook and Associates, Inc. Now, one of the reasons I chose this contract is you've never seen this contract before, and that's why I wanted to make sure you read it in its entirety. But also recognize that when we put these contracts out, people would often make changes to the contract, make line notes, cross things out, and then send it back to us signed. We'd have to then take that back out again, send the contract back with instructions, don't make any changes. So be aware that this whole process of who signs a contract and such, generally speaking, it is the lower tiered party that is going to sign the contract first. Then it is the person within the power of the contract who is going to sign it. In this case, a general contractor is expecting the subcontractor to sign first. An owner is going to send a contract out to the general contractor or to the construction manager, and they're going to have to send it back signed without any changes or delineations, and then it's going to go forward. So who becomes very important? Who is signing the contract? Who has the authority and power to make changes to the contract? And how far removed are we from that power, from the authority? Then we ask ourselves, what? What is very important. In this particular contract, you can see the what is the scope, and it is contained in parts 1A and parts 1B. What's important about that is you as a contract administrator have to make sure that what you have agreed to previously in your bid is what is in fact the scope of the work. Has something more been put into here that you had not bid on? More importantly, recognize that anything that you said before that has not been incorporated into the scope of the work is no longer part of the contract. So if you agreed upon doing something or not doing something or expecting the contractor to supply something and it's not in the scope, you have to bear responsibility for it. So the what becomes very important. Make sure this is what, in fact, you bid on, and beware any verbal understandings that you had prior to signing the contract are no longer valid unless they're made a part of the scope of the contract. Now, let's take a further look at where. Where is this being done? Now, that may seem fairly elementary and you don't pay a lot of attention to it, but where the contract is being done could have some significant challenges for you. For instance, you may have done work in other areas before, but never in this particular area. Therefore, you might need a license. A license may take time. Time might reflect upon your schedule, and your schedule may reflect upon some costs that are going to be accrued to your account. So where is it being done? It also might be in a property or in a location that requires particular care in certain instances. For instance, if you're working in a refinery, there's going to be safety concerns that maybe you have to worry about that you hadn't had to worry about before. So where becomes very important to consider. What are the particular special conditions? Are there jurisdictional issues because of where you're doing it? You may have worked in areas in which carpenters, laborers, operating engineers were paid at one pay scale. Move just across the border into another county, and it could be a totally different pay scale. So where this is being done becomes very important. And then when. When is a trick here that you have to be aware of. If the contract is dated on a certain date, and you want to look at when the principal contract is dated, plus when the contract you are signing is dated, but you also want to go back further and wonder or actually investigate when in fact is the contract actually signed. And when both parties have fully signed it, that's the execution date. If you do work prior to the actual execution, you may not be covered by the terms of the contract. So both the contract administrator for the general contractor, the contract administrator for the subcontractor, or the owner, the architect, whoever, construction manager, whoever it is, be sure you understand when this was done, when the contract was signed, and that no work was done prior to it because that work may not be covered by the terms of the contract. Once you're satisfied that your contract is in order in relation to the dates that they were signed and the dates that you appear on the job, there's a very important other start and completion date you have to be aware of. The start date in which you're expected to be on the project and the final date in which you're expected to be completed all of your work and be off the project. This can be very important, as we'll see in just a moment, related to liquidated damages, but it's also very important related to the entire project. A general contractor, a subcontractor, or a sub-subcontractor delaying a project can have consequences for the owner, for the contractor, for everyone on the project. So be sure you look at your start date, your completion date, and that you're able to meet those dates. Why? Now, of course, in construction, as in any business, there's really only one major why. The why is we're getting paid for it. So you want to look in the contract for what is the compensation under 4A and 4B, and then the terms of the payment. This is going to be very important because in the whole process of being paid, we want to make sure we're not delaying the opportunity to get that cash flow coming back to us. So why we're doing it, in all industry, we're doing it because we want to make a profit. The why is under the terms of the compensation Are there terms within that compensation that are going to make it difficult for us, or are there terms that we have to abide by? They could be forms that need to be filled out. It could be payroll records that need to be processed along with our payment requests. Why we're doing it is our compensation. Check that thoroughly and know that you have the processes in place to be paid properly. I also, in the why, want to draw your attention to the insurances that you also need to have in place. Insurances are going to be important, and owners are going to want to know that your insurance is in place, whether you're the general, the subcontractor, or a sub-subcontractor. And of course, the final interrogatory is how. And how comes up with some of these, insurance being one of them. Is a bond required? We're going to talk about bonds further in the whole text. Are there special provisions? And in this particular subcontract, we see that there is a special provision. It's liquidated damages, $350 a day. That means if this project is delayed and the fault belongs to you, you may be charged $350 a day. May not sound like much, but put that over a 10, 20-day period, and it starts to eat into your profits. So special provisions, liquidated damages are in this. Is a bond required? In this case, no, but a bond could be required. So what are the items that need to be furnished by you or by the contractor? Again, if you are relying upon the contractor having a crane available, for instance, on the job site, and the contract says no equipment is going to be furnished by the contractor, you as the subcontractor have to bring in the crane to make whatever deliveries you or whatever lifts and picks you have. So recognize you need to look into what is the insurance required, what are the bonds required, what are the special provisions, what is going to be provided by the contractor. How you're going to implement what you need to do becomes very important. So that gives you just an overview, a quick overview of the variable part of the contract. What do you need to do in order to make sure you facilitate and execute the contract in all its forms? Who, what, where, when, why, and how. Use those interrogatories as you look at the variable parts of the contract. In the next two sections, we're going to talk about the boilerplate or the general terms and conditions that are just as important, and in fact, the specifics of those, sometimes as we often note, the devil is in the details. Well, that's where we'll find the devil. So see you next time.